In a small town, a loyal German shepherd named Rusty saved a beehive from destruction. When a group of kids attacked the hive, Rusty rushed in to protect the bees, only to have the swarm surround him instead of stinging. Was this an act of gratitude, or did Rusty possess a mysterious connection to nature? The unexpected bond between a dog and a swarm of bees left everyone in awe. What do you think happened? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the rugged landscape of the West, casting long shadows over the barren fields of Saguaro Valley. The air, dry and still, carried the scent of dust and sagebrush, while the sky blushed with warm hues of orange and pink. In the distance, the faint hum of bees could be heard as they worked tirelessly, weaving through the golden light. The small farm where Jack Mallory lived with his family sat isolated at the edge of the valley, miles away from the nearest neighbor, but it was home. Jack had spent the better part of his 40 years here, cultivating his passion for beekeeping, and in turn, building a life that he had grown to love despite the challenges of the land. The hum of bees was a sound that Jack had grown accustomed to, a sound that echoed his life's rhythm, steady, persistent, and often quiet. Jack Mallory, standing on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, was a man shaped by the land. In his early 40s, his broad shoulders and strong frame were a result of years of hard labor. His dark hair, peppered with the first signs of gray, was neatly combed under his worn cowboy hat. His weathered face bore the marks of a man who had lived through both joy and hardship. Deep-set brown eyes, thoughtful yet full of quiet intensity, scanned the horizon, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man of few words, preferring the solitude of his farm to the company of others. The farm, with its fields of clover and rows of beehives, was where Jack felt most alive. But today, something was off. Rusty, his loyal Border Collie, stood by his side, ears perked, watching Jack with a knowing look. Rusty was more than just a dog to Jack. He was a partner, a protector, and a friend. At 8 years old, Rusty was in his prime. His sleek, black and white coat was speckled with the occasional gray hair around his muzzle, signs of his growing age. Rusty's bright, intelligent eyes never missed a detail. His lean frame, agile and strong, was the epitome of a working dog, capable of herding the sheep and tending to the farm in ways Jack had grown accustomed to. The dog's presence was calming, and when Jack was troubled, as he was today, Rusty seemed to sense it without any need for words. "Something's wrong," Jack muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the fields. Rusty let out a low whine, his gaze following Jack's. The air felt tense, charged in a way Jack couldn't explain, but there was a deep-rooted unease in his chest. He had a growing sense that something was about to change, and it wasn't a change for the better. Jack had spent years tending to his bees, a passion he inherited from his father. The sweet reward of honey and the satisfaction of watching a healthy hive thrive had brought him peace, a kind of solace that few could understand. But lately, his peaceful existence had been shattered by a string of unsettling events. A group of local children had taken to harassing the beehives, knocking over the boxes and throwing rocks at the delicate structures. Jack had tried to confront the children, but they only laughed and ran off, leaving behind chaos and frustration. "Rusty, come on," Jack called, snapping out his thoughts. Rusty barked once, a signal that he was ready, and bounded ahead, eager to follow Jack's lead. Together, they made their way toward the backfield where the most vulnerable hives were kept. Jack's mind raced with the possibilities of what he might find. His bees were his livelihood, and without them, his family would face even greater hardship. The small amount of honey he harvested each year was sold at the local market, just enough to make ends meet. Losing the hives meant more than just financial ruin. It would mean losing the dream he had worked so hard to build. The soft crunch of gravel beneath his boots was the only sound as Jack walked toward the row of beehives at the edge of his property. Rusty's ears flicked as he kept pace beside him, the dog's instincts honed over years of working together. Jack could feel the tension in the air, and when he reached the first hive, his heart sank. One of the hives had been completely destroyed. The wooden box lay broken, its lid tossed aside as if someone had deliberately smashed it. Bees buzzed frantically in the air, their home now a ruin. Jack cursed under his breath, clenching his fists. He could already hear the faint sounds of children laughing from a distance, their voices carrying across the fields. He knew who was responsible. Not again, Jack muttered, taking a step back. Rusty, who had been sniffing around the wreckage, suddenly froze, his body tense and alert. Jack turned to follow his dog's gaze and saw what Rusty had noticed. A group of kids was making their way toward the farm, laughing and throwing rocks in the air like they didn't have a care in the world. Jack's stomach tightened. The last time this had happened, he had warned them, but their parents had done little to intervene. Now, it seemed they had come back, and this time, Jack wasn't sure how much more he could take. His livelihood, his passion, was being ripped away by children too young to understand the damage they were causing. He had tried to speak to them, to reason with them, but their disregard for the hives had left him helpless. Rusty let out a low growl, standing between Jack and the approaching kids. Jack placed a hand on his dog's head, a silent command to hold his ground. The kids stopped a few feet away, their laughter fading as they noticed Jack and Rusty. One of the boys, about 12, stepped forward, a mischievous grin on his face. "Looks like your bees are in trouble, Jack," the boy said, his voice laced with mockery. "Guess they didn't like the fun we were having." Jack's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he considered confronting the boy, but the words didn't come. Instead, he turned his attention to the wreckage of the hive. The bees, now swarming in all directions, seemed to become agitated. Jack stepped back, feeling a surge of anger and helplessness, and in that moment, Rusty sprang into action. Without hesitation, Rusty rushed toward the kids, his body low and swift. The children froze, but Rusty wasn't there to attack. His goal was simple: protect. As the dog bounded through the field, the bees that had been flying erratically seemed to calm, following Rusty as he moved. It was as though they recognized his loyalty to Jack, and for some strange reason, they weren't aggressive toward him. Instead, they surrounded him, forming a protective barrier between Rusty and the children. The scene was surreal. Jack watched, stunned, as Rusty stood among the bees, completely unharmed. The children, too, seemed to be taken aback by what was happening. One of the boys whispered in awe, "How's that dog doing that?" Jack, still in shock, took a slow step forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Rusty knows. He's protecting them and us." The bees continued to swirl around Rusty in a protective, almost gentle manner. Jack had never seen anything like it before. The strange, silent bond between his dog and the bees was undeniable. For the first time that day, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. The bees weren't attacking, and neither was Rusty. Instead, it seemed as though they had formed an unlikely alliance. The children stood there, frozen, their mouths agape, unable to understand what was happening. Jack didn't wait for them to respond. He turned back to the wreckage, his heart racing. He had a long road ahead of him, but for the first time in what felt like ages, Jack wasn't alone. He had Rusty by his side, and now, maybe, there was a chance to protect what was left. The sun had barely crested over the horizon, and the valley was still cloaked in the cool, early morning air. Jack Mallory stood on his porch, a cup of coffee warming his hands, staring out at the golden fields that stretched before him. It was quiet, almost too quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd witnessed the day before. Rusty, ever the loyal companion, lay beside him, watching the day begin with an alertness only a working dog could possess. Jack's mind was still reeling from what had happened. Rusty, surrounded by the bees, the kids' astonished faces, the way the swarm had veiled his dog in protection. The strange alliance between Rusty and the bees lingered in his thoughts. He had never seen anything like it before, and he wasn't sure what it meant, but Jack was determined to focus on what needed to be done next. Suddenly, a faint honk sounded from down the gravel road. Jack turned his head to see Maggie Evans' old pickup truck rumbling up the driveway. Maggie was a longtime neighbor, a woman in her mid-50s, with short-cropped, silver hair and a face that was both kind and weathered. She had a wiry frame, always in motion, and her laugh could be heard echoing from her bee farm even on the windiest days. Maggie had been in the bee business for as long as Jack had been running his farm. Despite her small size, she was a force to be reckoned with, her personality as strong as the honey she produced. Jack set his coffee down and walked toward her truck, waving as she pulled to a stop. Maggie stepped out of the cab, her boots scuffing the dust as she hurried toward him. Her face was pale, her usual buoyancy replaced by a look of grim concern. "Jack," she said, her voice thick with worry, "I need your help. It's my hives, they've been destroyed." Jack felt his stomach drop. Destroyed? What happened? Maggie shook her head in frustration. A group of kids. They came by yesterday afternoon, just like they always do, but this time they weren't satisfied with scaring the bees away. "They smashed my hives, Jack. It's bad. My bees are scattered all over, and most of the hives are completely ruined. They're gone, Jack. Gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Jack saw the helplessness in her eyes. Maggie had always been the one who could handle anything, but this was beyond her. "That's terrible," Jack said quietly, his mind already working. "I'll go over there with you. We'll see what we can do." They didn't waste any time. Maggie led the way back to her property, and Jack followed, Rusty at his heels, the dog's eyes sharp as ever. As they drove down the narrow dirt road, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle over him. Maggie's farm was only a few miles away, but the thought of another round of destruction, another loss, he wasn't sure how much more he could take. When they arrived at Maggie's farm, the sight was worse than Jack had imagined. The rows of beehives, once neatly lined and orderly, were now toppled over, some of them splintered in half. The air was thick with the hum of bees, but their usual calm had turned to agitation. Jack could see that some of the bees were dying, their bodies strewn across the ground. Others, desperate and disoriented, buzzed frantically in the air, unsure where to go. Maggie stood frozen for a moment, her eyes scanning the devastation. Her hands trembled as she wiped her forehead with the back of her sleeve. "I don't know what to do, Jack. They've ruined everything. How am I supposed to recover from this?" Jack stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "We'll fix it, Maggie. We have to. You've worked too hard for this. We're going to get this sorted." Rusty, sensing the tension in the air, let out a low growl. Jack glanced down at him, and for the first time in a long while, he saw the same anger reflected in his dog's eyes. Rusty had always been a quiet, composed dog, but when it came to protecting what was important, he would do whatever it took. Jack knew that. "Well, Jack, I don't know how to stop them," Maggie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They keep coming back, and now they've gone too far." Jack thought for a moment. The kids, they didn't understand the gravity of what they were doing. They had no idea what was at stake. But Jack knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let this continue. He couldn't let these children ruin something that meant so much to Maggie, to the community, and to himself. "I'll talk to them," Jack said. "I'll make sure they understand. This isn't a game. They can't just go around destroying things. We'll put a stop to this." Maggie didn't look convinced, but she nodded in agreement. "I hope you're right, Jack. I really do." The next morning, Jack set out for the town square, where the kids usually gathered. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he had to do it. He couldn't let these children keep going down this destructive path. Rusty, as always, was by his side, his watchful eyes never straying from Jack. As Jack approached the group of kids, they stopped talking and turned to face him. The leader of the group, a scrappy boy with wild red hair and a cocky grin, stepped forward. "What do you want, Mallory?" the boy asked, his voice dripping with challenge. "Didn't know you cared so much about a bunch of bees." Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You think it's funny, don't you? Destroying people's hard work? You don't know what you're doing. Those hives, those bees, they're not just for fun. They're part of people's lives. Maggie's bees keep this town alive. Do you get that?" The boy shrugged, a smirk still plastered across his face. "We're just having fun. Who cares about bees anyway?" Jack felt his blood begin to boil. "You don't get it. You don't understand the damage you're causing. You're not just hurting Maggie. You're hurting everyone. If this keeps happening, there won't be any more bees, no more honey, no more life in this town. You'll ruin it for everyone." The boy looked bored, But Jack wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his tone low and serious. "You think it's all a joke? One day, you might not find someone to fix what you broke, and then you'll be sorry." The boy paused, his expression faltering for a moment. Jack's words had cut through his bravado, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't ready to back down. The other kids were still snickering, not fully grasping the weight of Jack's words. "You'll regret it," Jack said, turning on his heel to leave. "You keep it up, and you'll find out just how serious this is." Jack's words hung in the air, but as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The kids might not understand now, but sooner or later, they'd have to. He just hoped it wouldn't be too late. As Jack and Rusty made their way back to the farm, Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had tried to reason with the kids, but he wasn't sure it was enough. The destruction of the hives wasn't just a personal loss for Maggie. It was a warning. Jack wasn't sure who would be next, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just about bees. It was about protecting what mattered. And he'd be damned if he let anyone take that away. The cool morning air had turned warmer as the sun crept higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the small farm where Jack Mallory lived. He sat on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, staring out at the fields that stretched endlessly before him. The quiet was almost too much to bear. The buzzing of bees, usually a source of comfort, now seemed like a constant reminder of the fragile balance Jack had worked so hard to maintain. It wasn't just the destruction of the hives that weighed on his mind. It was the threat to his community, to the way of life he had fought so hard to protect. Rusty, Jack's Border Collie, was lying on the porch at his feet, his eyes never leaving Jack. Rusty had been with Jack through thick and thin, and the loyalty between them was undeniable. The dog's coat, black and white, shimmered in the light, but it was the sharp intelligence in his eyes that made him more than just a working dog. Rusty was a protector, and Jack knew that without a doubt, his dog would be at his side for whatever came next. Jack had always prided himself on his ability to handle things on his own, but today he was feeling the weight of the situation more than ever. The kids had crossed a line, and while he had tried to reason with them, Jack knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to stop them. The anger inside him was building, and it wasn't just for the damage they had caused to the hives. It was the deeper issue, the lack of respect, the sense of entitlement that these kids had. They didn't understand the importance of the bees, of the land, of the work that went into building something from nothing. Jack had been born on this land. His father had worked it before him, and now it was Jack's turn to protect it. As he sat there, deep in thought, the memory of his father's voice echoed in his mind. "A man's word is all he has," his father had said time and again. Jack had always believed in that. He had always prided himself on his integrity. But now, faced with the destruction of everything he had worked for, Jack wasn't sure how far his word would go. Would it be enough to stop the kids, to make them understand the consequences of their actions? "Rusty," Jack muttered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I don't know what to do." Rusty let out a low whine, as if understanding his owner's internal struggle. The dog shifted slightly, resting his head on Jack's knee. Jack sighed and looked down at the loyal companion. Rusty's eyes locked with his, the understanding between them clear. Jack knew that Rusty didn't need words to understand what was at stake. He could sense Jack's emotions, feel the tension in the air, and in that moment, Jack knew that his dog would follow him, no matter what. Jack stood up, dusting off his jeans. He couldn't keep sitting here, stewing over what to do. Action was required. He had to act before the situation got worse, before the children destroyed more hives, before they tore apart something that couldn't be fixed. Rusty sprang to his feet, tail wagging, ready for whatever came next. He was always at Jack's side, ever ready to do what was needed. Jack walked toward the barn where he kept his tools and supplies. He knew what needed to be done. He had to confront the children, face them down, and make them understand. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be comfortable, but Jack had never backed down from a challenge before. And this one was no different. As he entered the barn, Jack glanced at the wall where old family photos were displayed. His father, his grandfather, and even great-grandfather had all worked this land, built it from the ground up. Jack had always felt proud of his heritage, but now, with the destruction of the hives, he felt the weight of that legacy pressing on him. He couldn't let the work of generations before him fall to pieces. Not like this. "Let's go, Rusty," Jack said firmly, his voice filled with resolve. Rusty trotted ahead, his ears perked as they made their way to the front yard. It wasn't long before Jack saw the group of kids from the previous day approaching again, their faces full of mischief. The same boy, the one with the wild red hair, was leading the group. Jack's heart pounded as he walked toward them, feeling the tension rise with each step. The boy saw him first and smirked, the same cocky attitude plastered on his face. Well, if it isn't Jack Mallory," the boy said, stepping forward. "What's the matter? Are you mad we knocked down your little beehives?" Jack stopped in front of them, his voice low and controlled. "You think this is funny, huh?" His eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to the boy. "You think it's a game, destroying something that doesn't belong to you? Do you have any idea what those hives mean? Do you know how much work went into them?" The boy shrugged, his smirk fading slightly, but he wasn't backing down. "It's just bees. Who cares about bees?" Jack's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Rusty stepped forward, growling softly. The boy's eyes widened, but he quickly composed himself, clearly intimidated by the dog. Rusty's posture was strong and unwavering, his tail stiff, eyes locked on the boy. "You don't get it, do you?" Jack continued, his voice hard now. "Those bees aren't just bees. They're part of this land, part of this community. Without them, we don't have honey. Without them, we don't have a living. Your actions have consequences, whether you see it or not." The boy shifted uncomfortably under Jack's gaze. There was a flicker of realization in his eyes, but it was fleeting. "You can't really stop us," the boy muttered, but his voice lacked the same confidence it had before. Jack leaned in, his face inches from the boy's. "You think I can't? You think you can keep destroying what doesn't belong to you and face no consequences?" His voice softened but carried weight. "I won't let that happen. Not on my watch." The group of kids looked at each other uneasily, but Jack knew this was only the beginning. The boy might have backed down for now, but Jack could sense the rebellion still simmering beneath the surface. "You'll regret this," Jack said, turning to walk away. Rusty followed closely behind, his presence a constant reminder of the loyalty and protection that Jack cherished. As Jack and Rusty walked back toward the house, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The kids had backed down this time, but Jack knew they would be back. They wouldn't stop until they had tested his resolve. But Jack was ready for them. He had to be. As they neared the farmhouse, Jack looked over at Rusty, who had remained by his side the whole time. "We'll get through this, boy. Together." Rusty barked once in agreement, his eyes full of trust and loyalty. Jack knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the fields of Jack Mallory's farm. The day had been long, the heat heavy, but now the cool evening breeze offered some relief. Jack had spent the last few hours working in the garden, tending to the crops that were slowly recovering from the drought. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his rough hands moving skillfully as he worked beside Rusty, his loyal Border Collie. Rusty's black and white coat gleamed in the setting sun, his eyes sharp and watchful, as always. The bond between Jack and his dog was unspoken but profound. Rusty had been by his side through thick and thin, a constant in the unpredictable world of farming. Despite the quiet moment, Jack's mind was still preoccupied with the previous day's events. The confrontation with a group of children had only been a temporary victory. He could feel it in his bones. The children hadn't fully understood the gravity of what they were doing. There was still a part of him that feared they would return, their mischief escalating into something far worse. Jack knew that if they kept at it, it wouldn't just be the hives that would suffer. It would be the entire community. The bees, the honey, the land, everything was connected. Without the bees, Jack's livelihood would crumble, and that was a reality he wasn't prepared to face. "Rusty," Jack muttered, his voice low, "we've got to be ready for whatever comes next." The dog's ears perked up at the sound of Jack's voice, his eyes locking with Jack's in perfect understanding. There was no need for words. Rusty was always ready, always alert, always waiting for his next command. As the evening wore on, Jack took a moment to check the rows of beehives. He had already repaired the damage from the previous attack, but it didn't take long for him to realize that the work was never truly done. Every day felt like a battle, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep fighting this invisible war. Just then, Jack's gaze shifted to the edge of his property. A group of kids was coming down the dirt road, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the evening air. Jack felt his heart rate quicken, and without thinking, he stood up from his kneeling position, his eyes narrowing. Rusty, sensing the change in Jack's demeanor, immediately rose to his feet, his body tense and ready for action. The kids were carrying tools, shovels, sticks, and even rocks, and Jack's stomach sank. It was happening again. They were heading straight for Maggie's beehives. No, Jack whispered to himself. He couldn't let this happen again. Rusty barked once, his eyes fixed on the group of children as they approached the hives. Jack knew that the time for words was over. He had warned them once, but this wasn't a warning anymore. It was a final stand. Rusty, Jack said firmly, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Let's go. Rusty didn't hesitate. He sprinted ahead, his agile body cutting through the air like a living missile, a blur of black and white against the golden backdrop of the fields. Jack followed closely behind, but he knew there was no need for him to intervene. Rusty was already doing his job. As the group of kids neared the hives, they stopped in their tracks, their eyes widening as they saw Rusty charging toward them. The leader of the group, a lanky boy with unruly brown hair and a defiant expression, raised his hand, signaling for the others to stop. "What's your problem, Mallory?" the boy called out, his voice dripping with attitude. Jack stepped forward, his eyes locking with the boy's. "You kids don't learn, do you?" he said, his voice firm but calm. "You think this is some kind of joke? These bees aren't just insects. They're part of this farm, part of this community. And if you destroy them, you'll be destroying a piece of all of us." The boy smirked, shrugging his shoulders. "We're just having fun. Who cares about bees?" Jack's blood boiled, but before he could respond, a strange thing happened. Rusty, who had been charging toward the children, stopped in his tracks and let out a soft growl. But instead of attacking the kids, he turned toward the beehives, his posture tense, his eyes focused on the swarm of bees hovering nearby. The bees, which had been buzzing erratically just moments before, suddenly seemed to calm down. As Rusty stood there, the bees appeared to surround him, not in aggression, but in a protective formation. The children fell silent, their eyes widening as they watched the scene unfold. Jack felt a knot form in his stomach, but he couldn't look away. Rusty, standing tall and resolute, had become a symbol of something greater than just a dog. He was a protector. The bees seemed to recognize that. They weren't attacking, but instead, they circled around Rusty, almost as if they were offering their protection to him. Jack's voice broke the silence. "This is what you don't understand," he said quietly. "These bees aren't just insects. They're part of a greater balance, part of the world around us. Rusty understands that. He's here to protect them, just like I am." The group of kids stood there, stunned. For a moment, there was no sound except the gentle hum of the bees as they surrounded Rusty. The boy who had been leading the group stepped forward, his expression softening as he looked at the dog and the bees. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." Jack took a step forward, his voice gentler now. "That's the problem, kid. You don't realize the impact your actions have. You think it's just fun, just messing around, but what you're doing has real consequences. These bees aren't just for honey. They're part of the ecosystem. Without them, we don't have a future." The boy looked at Jack, and for the first time, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt anything," he said, his voice quieter now. Jack nodded. "I know you didn't. But you have to understand, it's not just about what you mean, it's about what you do." As the boy stood there, deep in thought, Jack glanced at Rusty, who was still standing by the beehives, watching over them like a sentinel. The dog's eyes met Jack's, and for a brief moment, Jack saw something in Rusty's gaze that spoke volumes. Rusty had done what Jack couldn't. He had shown the children what it meant to protect, to stand firm in the face of destruction, and to understand the value of something greater than themselves. The boy finally lowered his head, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't know. We'll stop. We won't come back." Jack felt a small sense of relief wash over him, but he knew it wasn't over. This was just the first step. He had to make sure the message stuck, not just with these kids, but with everyone in the community. He couldn't let the cycle of destruction continue. The bees, the land, the community, everything was connected. And Jack Mallory wasn't going to let anyone tear it apart. With a final look at the children, Jack turned and started back toward his farmhouse. Rusty trotted at his side, his loyal eyes scanning the horizon as they walked. The battle wasn't over, but for now they had won. The following days were a strange blend of hope and uncertainty. As the sun rose higher each morning, Jack Mallory felt a weight lift from his chest. He had confronted the kids, and though they hadn't fully understood the damage they had caused, Jack was starting to believe they might be on the path to something better. The events of the past few days had shaken everyone in the small community of Saguaro Valley. The confrontation with the children, Rusty's incredible act of protection, and the sudden understanding that had begun to take root. These were changes no one had anticipated. Maggie Evans, who had been understandably upset after the destruction of her beehives, stood beside Jack as they watched the children from a distance. Jack had never seen her so thoughtful before. Her usual fiery energy, which was often channeled into her beekeeping and running her apiary, seemed quieter, more reflective. As a woman in her 50s, Maggie had always been a force of nature herself, tough and independent, with the kind of laugh that made you feel like everything would be okay. But now, standing next to Jack, her face was thoughtful, her silver hair falling in soft waves around her face as she observed the children across the field. The children had gathered again near the beehives, though this time they weren't throwing rocks or making loud noises. They were standing in a loose circle, whispering among themselves, looking toward the rows of hives with expressions that were hard to read. Jack's sharp eyes caught the slight shift in their behavior. The same group of kids, the red-haired boy who had been the ringleader, a couple of girls, and a few others, had come back, but something was different. They weren't as defiant as before. They were quiet, hesitant, almost uncertain of what to do next. "Jack," Maggie said, her voice soft but filled with curiosity, Do you think they get it now? Do you think they understand?" Jack took a deep breath and watched the group of kids more closely. "I don't know, Maggie," he replied, his voice filled with both uncertainty and hope. "But they're not acting the way they did before. There's a shift in the air. It's like they're finally seeing the bigger picture." Maggie's eyes softened, her gaze never leaving the children. "I hope you're right, Jack. I really do. It's not just about the bees, is it? It's about how we all fit into this. I think Rusty showed them something they've never seen before." Jack nodded, his hand resting gently on Rusty's head, the dog standing quietly by his side. Rusty's sharp eyes scanned the children, his body still and poised. The bond between the dog and the bees was something none of them could quite explain, but it had been enough to make the children pause, enough to make them rethink their actions. As Jack watched the group, his mind began to wander back to the earlier days of his life, when things had seemed simpler. The sense of community, the way everyone looked out for one another. Those were the values that had been passed down to him from his father and his grandfather before that. They were values that had been tested over time, especially with the drought that had plagued the valley for years. Now it felt like those values were being tested again, but in a different way. The leader of the children, the red-haired boy named Tom, stepped forward. His face, once cocky and full of defiance, now seemed more contemplative. He walked slowly toward the edge of the beehive rows, the others following him quietly. Jack and Maggie exchanged a glance, both sensing that something important was about to happen. "Mr. Mallory," Tom called out, his voice quieter than it had been the last time they'd spoken. Jack turned to face him, his hand resting gently on Rusty's back. "Yes, Tom," Jack replied, his tone calm but guarded. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he was ready for whatever came next. We didn't mean to destroy everything," Tom said, his eyes looking at the ground. "We were just messing around. We didn't understand what the bees meant. I mean, I didn't. We didn't know that they were important. To you. To everyone. The sincerity in Tom's voice was palpable, and Jack felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. "I get it, Tom," Jack said, taking a step toward the boy. "You didn't know, but now you do. And that's all that matters. We all make mistakes. What counts is what we do next. What we choose to do after we realize the damage we've caused." Tom nodded, glancing at the other kids. They were all standing there, silent now, listening to Jack. The group, once so full of defiance and bravado, was now quiet and reflective. It was clear that Jack's words had struck a chord with them, and Rusty's unwavering loyalty and the protective stance he had taken with the bees seemed to have made the biggest impression. One of the girls in the group, a smaller girl with brown pigtails, spoke up. "We're sorry," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We didn't mean to hurt anything. We didn't know it was that serious." Jack smiled softly, his heart lightening at her words. "It's all right," he said gently. "But you need to understand this isn't just about the bees. It's about respecting everything around us, living things, the land, the people. We all share this space, and if we don't respect it, we'll lose it." Maggie, standing by Jack's side, spoke up. "What Jack is saying is true. We all need to work together to protect what we have. And from now on, we'll help each other. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. But we need your help, too." The kids exchanged looks, and then Tom stepped forward again, his face serious but resolved. "We'll help," he said. "We'll make sure nothing happens to the bees again. We promise." Jack and Maggie exchanged another look, this time one filled with relief. The tension in the air had shifted, and Jack could feel the weight of the situation lifting. It wasn't over yet, but the children had taken the first step toward understanding, toward respecting something bigger than themselves. As the group turned to leave, Tom looked over his shoulder and said, "We'll come back tomorrow to help clean up if that's okay." His voice was earnest, and Jack could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I'd appreciate that," Jack said, giving a nod of approval. "We'll be here." As the children walked away, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but this was a start. They had learned something important, and he had no doubt that they would continue to learn, to grow. And that, Jack thought, was the most important thing. Sometimes it took a little bit of patience, a bit of guidance, and a whole lot of heart to make a difference. Rusty, standing by his side, looked up at Jack, his tail wagging slightly. Jack scratched behind his ears, smiling. "Good job, boy," he murmured. "Good job." With the evening sun sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, Jack felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had weathered the storm, but there was still work to be done. As he watched the children leave, their steps slower and more thoughtful than before, Jack realized that the real work wasn't just about protecting the bees or fixing the hives. It was about teaching the next generation the value of respect, loyalty, and community. And with Rusty by his side, Jack knew they were ready for whatever came next. It had been a few weeks since the day of the confrontation, and the mood around Jack Mallory's farm had shifted. The air seemed a little lighter, the days a little brighter. What had started as a small, desperate attempt to save Maggie's beehives from destruction had turned into something much bigger. Something that Jack hadn't fully anticipated but had come to appreciate. The children who had once been the source of so much trouble had not only stopped their destructive behavior, they had become advocates for the cause. And it wasn't just the kids. The entire community had rallied together to protect the bees, the hives, and the environment they all depended on. Jack sat on his porch, a slight breeze carrying the scent of blooming wildflowers into the air. His dog, Rusty, lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws as he watched the horizon. The dog's deep, intelligent eyes never missed a detail, and Jack had come to rely on that quiet vigilance. It had been Rusty's loyalty and courage that had made all the difference that day when the bees and the children had come face to face. Now, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of peace, knowing that the storm of destruction was finally over. But that peace was tempered with the understanding that they all had a long road ahead of them. Maggie Evans walked down the dirt road toward the farmhouse, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Her silver hair shone in the sunlight, and her face, though still weathered by years of hard work, was bright with a smile. She had always been strong, but something about her was different now. She had always been a fighter, but after the children had apologized and promised to help, Maggie had begun to see a new sense of hope in the future. She wasn't sure if the change in the kids was permanent, but there was no denying the sincerity in their actions. They were helping, not just on her farm, but on Jack's as well. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. "Maggie," Jack called as she approached. "What's got you smiling today?" Maggie grinned, her blue eyes sparkling. "You won't believe it, Jack, but the kids, Tom, and the others, they've been coming over every afternoon to help. They're cleaning up the mess we made, fixing the hives, and checking on the bees. I've never seen them so interested in something other than causing trouble." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's surprising." Maggie nodded. "I thought I'd seen it all, Jack, but I think they've finally figured out what we've been trying to teach them all along. They're not just helping with the hives, either. They've been cleaning up around the farm, picking up trash, and helping with the irrigation. They're starting to understand. They get it now." Jack's heart swelled with pride as he looked down at Rusty, who was now wagging his tail at the mention of the kids. Rusty had been a constant presence, not just for Jack, but for everyone. The dog had become a symbol of loyalty, of protection, of what it meant to stand firm in the face of adversity. Jack wasn't sure if he could take credit for the kids' change of heart, but he knew that Rusty had played a big part in it. Just then, the sound of a truck engine approaching broke the silence. Jack turned to see a familiar face, Sheriff Ray Daniels, the local sheriff, pulling up in his patrol car. The sheriff was in his late 50s, his hair graying at the temples, and his face lined with years of service. He had a tall, broad frame, and though he was a man of few words, he was respected by everyone in the community. He had always kept a close eye on the children and their antics, and it seemed that he, too, had noticed the changes. "Morning, Jack," Sheriff Daniels called out as he stepped out of his car. "Maggie." "Morning, Ray," Maggie replied, tipping her hat to the sheriff. "What brings you out this way?" Ray scratched his beard thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I've been getting some reports from the other farms around here. The kids, they've been cleaning up the land, picking up litter, and keeping an eye on the bees. It's not much, but I figure it's a step in the right direction. I don't know what you did, Jack, but it looks like it's working." Jack smiled. "I didn't do anything. It was Rusty that did the hard work." The sheriff chuckled, glancing down at the dog, who was now sitting at attention, his ears perked. "Well, Rusty's a good dog. I think you might be right, though. The way he protected those bees, it's a sight I'll never forget." Jack nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude toward his dog. Rusty had always been there for him, but now the dog had become a symbol for something greater. A protector, not just of Jack, but of the community, of nature, and of the delicate balance that held it all together. "So what's the next step?" Sheriff Daniels asked. "What can we do to make sure this keeps going? We can't afford to let up." Jack took a deep breath, looking over at the children who were now working in the distance, repairing the beehives. "We keep going. We keep teaching them. We keep showing them that protecting the land and the bees, protecting each other, that's what matters. It's going to take time, but we can make a difference. And we'll do it together." The sheriff nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. We've all got a part to play in this. I've been talking to the town council, and we're working on setting up a program to teach the kids about conservation, about the importance of bees, and about working together to protect what we have. It's time to stop letting things fall apart." Jack smiled, his heart lifted by the sheriff's words. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but there was a shift happening in the community. People were starting to understand. They were starting to see the bigger picture. "Thanks, Ray," Jack said, clapping the sheriff on the back. "We couldn't do it without the support of everyone around here." Maggie, standing beside Jack, nodded in agreement. "That's right. We're all in this together." As the sheriff left, Jack and Maggie watched as the kids continued to work on the hives. They were no longer the same kids who had destroyed the beehives weeks ago. They were learning. They were growing. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a sense of hope for the future of Saguaro Valley. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the air cooled, Jack stood on his porch, looking out at the land. Rusty sat beside him, his head resting on Jack's knee. The dog's eyes were tired but content. Jack knew that the road ahead would have its challenges, but he also knew that they were on the right path. With the community united, with the kids now on their side, and with Rusty as their constant reminder of loyalty and protection, there was nothing they couldn't do. "We'll keep going, boy," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "We'll keep protecting what we have, together." And as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that they had made a difference, not just for the bees, but for the entire community. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Jack Mallory felt confident that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the end, this story is a reminder that the world around us is fragile, and every action we take, no matter how small, has an impact. Just like the bees, which are often overlooked but are vital to our ecosystem, we must protect the things that sustain us, whether it's the environment, our communities, or the relationships we cherish. By showing kindness, understanding, and respect for the natural world and each other, we can make a real difference. This story also teaches us that change is possible. Even when we think something is lost, a simple act of kindness, loyalty, or education can help us rebuild and move forward together. Like Rusty, sometimes we all need to stand firm in the face of adversity and protect what we love. It's about taking responsibility and being part of the solution. So, as we go about our daily lives, let's remember that we all play a part in the bigger picture. We have the power to change the world, one small step at a time. Let's be mindful of our actions and work together to protect what matters. If you've enjoyed this story and the lessons it brings, feel free to share it with others. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. What did this story teach you? And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Let's spread kindness and understanding, and may God bless each of you watching today. Comment amen if you feel inspired to take action, and may the spirit of unity and protection guide you in all your endeavors.